Causes of the First Punic War. The First Punic War, fought between Rome and Carthage from 264 to 241 BCE, was a landmark conflict that initiated a prolonged struggle for dominance in the Mediterranean region. This war was triggered by a combination of political, economic, and strategic factors, making it one of the most significant clashes of antiquity. Its causes can be categorized into three major areas: the contested control of Sicily, the local conflict in Messina, and the overarching rivalry between two expanding superpowers, Rome and Carthage. Sicily as a battleground. Sicily's role as the primary theatre of the First Punic War cannot be overstated. The island's central position in the Mediterranean made it a prized possession for any power seeking dominance over regional trade and naval activity. With fertile lands that supported agriculture, as well as access to critical trade routes, Sicily was not only an economic asset, but also a strategic military base. By the early 3rd century BCE, Sicily was a politically fragmented island. The western parts were under Carthaginian influence, while Greek city-states, such as Syracuse, dominated the eastern regions. This division created a volatile situation, as both Rome and Carthage sought to exploit the island's resources and geographical advantage. For Carthage, maintaining control over western Sicily was crucial to protecting its maritime trade and North African heartland. Rome, however, saw Sicily as a stepping stone for expanding its influence beyond the Italian peninsula. Sicily's economic prosperity also attracted the attention of both powers. Its fertile plains produced abundant crops, especially grain, which was a vital resource for feeding armies and populations. Control over the island meant not only economic wealth, but also the ability to sustain large-scale military campaigns. Thus, Sicily's importance went beyond territorial ambitions and became a symbol of strategic supremacy in the region. The conflict in Messina. The spark of war. The immediate cause of the First Punic War was a seemingly minor dispute in the Sicilian city of Messina. The Mamertines, a group of mercenaries originally from Campania, had seized control of Messina after betraying its inhabitants. Their occupation of the city created instability, as they frequently raided nearby territories, including those controlled by Syracuse. Faced with military pressure from the Syracusans, the Mamertines sought external assistance to maintain their hold on Messina. Initially, they allied with Carthage, which sent troops to protect the city. However, the Mamertines soon grew dissatisfied with Carthaginian control and turned to Rome for help, offering their allegiance in return for military support. Rome's decision to intervene in Messina. The decision by Rome to intervene in Messina was a complex and controversial one, reflecting a blend of pragmatic strategy and opportunism. At its core was the plight of the Mamertines, a group of mercenaries originally from Campania who had seized the city of Messina by force. After taking control of the city, the Mamertines established themselves as rulers, often resorting to raiding nearby territories, including those controlled by Syracuse, the most powerful Greek city-state in Sicily. Their actions earned them widespread enmity, and when Syracuse, under the leadership of Hero II, launched a military campaign against them, the Mamertines were left vulnerable. Initially, the Mamertines turned to Carthage for assistance, recognizing its naval power and influence over western Sicily. Carthage responded by sending a small garrison to Messina, effectively protecting the city and asserting its dominance in the region. However, the Mamertines soon grew wary of Carthaginian control, fearing they would become subservient to Carthage's broader ambitions. Seeking to escape this dependency, they appealed to Rome for help, a move that created a significant dilemma for the Roman Senate. Rome faced a moral and political conundrum. On one hand, the Mamertines were widely regarded as lawless opportunists whose actions had destabilized the region. Supporting them could tarnish Rome's reputation, especially among Greek city-states in southern Italy and Sicily. On the other hand, intervening in Messina offered Rome a chance to counter Carthage's influence in Sicily and gain a critical foothold on the island. Sicily's proximity to the Italian mainland made it strategically vital, as control of the island would allow Rome to protect its southern territories from potential threats. Ultimately, strategic considerations outweighed moral concerns. Rome decided to support the Mamertines, sending troops to Messina and expelling the Carthaginian garrison. This intervention marked the beginning of direct hostilities between Rome and Carthage. From Carthage's perspective, Rome's actions were an unacceptable provocation that challenged its authority in Sicily. The conflict in Messina thus became the spark that ignited the First Punic War, setting the stage for a larger struggle between two rising powers. Rivalry for supremacy in the Mediterranean. The First Punic War was not an isolated conflict, but part of a broader rivalry between Rome and Carthage for dominance in the Mediterranean. By the mid-3rd century BCE, both powers were expanding their influence, but their methods and priorities often brought them into conflict. Carthage, a maritime power. Carthage was one of the wealthiest and most powerful city-states in the ancient world. Its strength lay in its dominance of maritime trade, which was facilitated by its powerful navy. Carthage controlled a vast network of trade routes that spanned the western Mediterranean, connecting North Africa, southern Spain, Sardinia, Corsica, and western Sicily. The city's wealth was derived from trade in goods, such as precious metals, textiles, wine, and grain. Carthage's naval power allowed it to protect its trade routes and enforce its authority over its territories. The city also relied heavily on mercenaries to supplement its military, enabling it to maintain a large and diverse fighting force without overburdening its citizenry. This system, while effective, had its weaknesses, particularly in terms of loyalty and cohesion. Rome, a rising land power. In contrast, Rome was a land-based power that had recently unified the Italian peninsula through a series of military campaigns. Its strength lay in its disciplined and adaptable legions, which were composed of citizen soldiers. Rome's military tradition emphasized collective responsibility, with citizens viewing military service as both a duty and an honor. Although Rome initially lacked a navy, its ambitions were not limited to the Italian mainland. The growing rivalry with Carthage pushed Rome to expand its capabilities, leading to the construction of a fleet that could challenge Carthage's dominance at sea. This marked a significant shift in Roman strategy and demonstrated its determination to compete with Carthage on equal terms. Economic and strategic competition. Sicily became the focal point of this rivalry due to its economic and strategic importance. The island was a major source of grain, which was essential for feeding both armies and civilian populations. Its location at the crossroads of key maritime routes made it a valuable asset for controlling trade in the western Mediterranean. For Carthage, maintaining control over Sicily was crucial to its economic prosperity and security. For Rome, gaining a foothold on the island represented an opportunity to challenge Carthage's dominance and secure its own economic and strategic interests. This competition for resources and influence created a volatile situation that made conflict inevitable. Escalation of tensions. The rising tensions between Athens and Sparta were not caused by a single incident, but rather a series of events that accumulated over time, gradually intensifying the rivalry between the two Greek powers. Their conflict stemmed from their competing interests in the Greek world, particularly over control of territories, alliances, and dominance in the Aegean Sea. The situation in Corinth, especially the tension over the Delian League and the Peloponnesian League, served as a significant catalyst for the war between Athens and Sparta. Athenian Empire and expansion. Athens, after its victory in the Persian Wars, had established itself as the dominant power in the Aegean through the formation of the Delian League. This league was initially a defensive alliance against Persia, but Athens soon transformed it into an empire, using the contributions of other Greek city-states to fund its expansion and fortify its power. Athens turned the resources of the league into its own, funding grand projects such as the Parthenon and expanding its influence across the Aegean world. The Athenians viewed their growing empire as a means to protect their interests and secure their position as the leading power in Greece. However, their increasingly aggressive approach to maintaining control over the Delian League was met with resistance, particularly from Sparta and its allies. Sparta, known for its military discipline and oligarchic rule, feared the growing power of Athens and sought to curb its influence over the Greek states. Spartan fears and counteractions. Sparta, a militaristic society that prided itself on its land-based power and disciplined warriors, found itself at odds with Athens' naval strength and imperial ambitions. The Peloponnesian League, led by Sparta, was a coalition of Greek city-states that sought to maintain their independence from Athenian influence. Sparta's primary goal was to limit Athens' ability to project power, particularly by preventing its expansion into key regions such as the Peloponnese and the Aegean. The Spartan fear of Athenian dominance was compounded by Athens' interference in the affairs of other city-states. Tensions in places like Corinth, where Athenian influence was growing, made the rivalry between the two powers even more pronounced. The threat posed by Athens' growing naval fleet and economic strength led Sparta to take more aggressive measures, culminating in the Peloponnesian War. Athenian naval supremacy. Athenian naval strength was the cornerstone of its empire. The city's powerful fleet enabled it to control trade routes, protect its allies, and exert influence over the Mediterranean. Athens' superior naval power allowed it to engage in battles on the seas, ensuring the flow of resources to the city and maintaining its dominance in the region. This focus on naval strength also provided Athens with the ability to project power across the Greek world, further exacerbating the tension between Athens and Sparta. While Sparta was a formidable military force on land, it lacked the naval capabilities to challenge Athens directly at sea. This disparity in military strengths between the two powers added to the complexity of the conflict. To counter Athens' naval dominance, Sparta began to seek alliances with Persian forces and other maritime powers, hoping to level the playing field in the coming war. Diplomatic efforts and breakdown of negotiations. Despite the growing tensions, both Athens and Sparta made numerous diplomatic attempts to avoid war. Initially, there were efforts to settle their differences peacefully through negotiations and treaties. However, the interests of the two powers were so fundamentally opposed that these diplomatic efforts failed. Athens, with its expanding empire and economic ambitions, was unwilling to accept limits on its influence. Sparta, on the other hand, was determined to protect the autonomy of the Greek states and curb Athenian expansion. The catalyst for the war came in the form of the conflict between Corinth and Corcyra, two cities that were part of the opposing leagues. Athens intervened in the dispute by allying with Corcyra, while Sparta and its allies supported Corinth. This intervention marked the breaking point in relations between Athens and Sparta, as both sides recognized that war was now inevitable. The failure of diplomacy left the two powers no choice but to go to war. The Punic Wars, a struggle for supremacy. The Punic Wars were not just territorial disputes. They were a fundamental clash of empires, driven by contrasting political structures, military strategies, and economic systems. Rome and Carthage, two dominant powers in the Mediterranean, represented opposing ideologies of governance, warfare, and commerce. The wars were a fierce battle for control over the Mediterranean and its key trade routes, and ultimately, they shaped the future of the ancient world. Governance: Roman Republic versus Carthaginian oligarchy. Rome and Carthage had strikingly different political systems that influenced their strategies and actions during the Punic Wars. Rome, a republic, was governed by elected officials and had a broad-based political system that involved its citizens in decision-making. Roman society valued civic participation and military service as a duty to the state. This system fostered unity and resilience, especially during times of crisis, as the people rallied behind the state. In contrast, Carthage was an oligarchy, controlled by a small group of wealthy elites who held power over military and political decisions. The Carthaginian government was dominated by merchant families who prioritized trade and economic growth over direct citizen involvement. This oligarchic structure allowed for a more centralized decision-making process, but it also led to internal tensions as competing factions struggled for power. The reliance on mercenary forces also reflected a lack of unity within Carthage, making it more vulnerable in long-lasting conflicts. Military organization: Roman legions versus Carthaginian mercenaries. The military strength of Rome and Carthage was shaped by their political systems and reflected their contrasting approaches to warfare. Rome's military was composed of well-trained citizen soldiers who fought for the glory and security of their republic. The Roman legions were highly disciplined and adaptable, and their cohesive structure gave them the ability to fight effectively on both land and sea. Roman soldiers viewed military service as both a duty and a privilege, which strengthened their resolve in battle. Carthage, on the other hand, relied on mercenaries from various regions, including Numidia, Iberia, and Gaul. While these mercenaries were skilled in combat, they were often motivated by payment rather than loyalty to Carthage. This created challenges in maintaining discipline and unity, particularly when mercenaries were used to fight in prolonged campaigns. Despite having one of the largest and most powerful navies in the Mediterranean, Carthage's reliance on mercenaries became a liability during the Punic Wars, especially in the later stages of the conflict when their forces began to fragment. Economic systems: Roman agriculture versus Carthaginian trade. The economies of Rome and Carthage were also fundamentally different, which had a significant impact on their war efforts. Rome's economy was primarily agrarian, based on the production of crops and livestock. The Roman state depended on its citizens and the resources of its territories to sustain its military campaigns. This self-sufficient model allowed Rome to support its legions and maintain a strong, stable economy, even during extended warfare. Carthage, on the other hand, was a maritime power with an economy driven by trade and commerce. The Carthaginians controlled a vast network of trade routes that spanned the Mediterranean, and their wealth was derived from their commercial empire. This reliance on trade allowed Carthage to field a powerful navy and maintain its influence in the region. However, during the Punic Wars, Rome's eventual naval power and strategic blockades undermined Carthage's economic model, cutting off vital trade routes and weakening Carthaginian resources. Naval power: Rome's fleet versus Carthage's naval dominance. One of the key factors in the Punic Wars was the competition for control of the seas. Carthage had long been the dominant naval power in the Mediterranean, with a fleet that outmatched any other in the region. The Carthaginian navy enabled the empire to control vital trade routes and protect its interests across the Mediterranean. Rome, traditionally a land-based military power, had little experience with naval warfare at the onset of the Punic Wars. However, recognizing the importance of naval power, Rome quickly adapted and built a formidable fleet. Rome's innovation in naval warfare, particularly the use of the corvus, a boarding device, allowed its legions to fight on the seas as if they were on land, making the Roman navy a more effective force against Carthage. This shift in naval capabilities marked a turning point in the conflict, as Rome began to challenge Carthage's supremacy at sea. Diplomatic struggles and breakdown of negotiations. Despite the escalating tensions, both Rome and Carthage initially sought to resolve their differences through diplomacy. Rome, alarmed by Carthage's growing influence in Sicily, aimed to limit Carthaginian control over the region. On the other hand, Carthage viewed Rome's interference in Sicily as a direct threat to its interests and dominance in the Mediterranean. Negotiations between the two powers ultimately failed due to their irreconcilable differences. Carthage was unwilling to relinquish control over Sicily, which it considered essential to its strategic and commercial interests. Rome, however, saw Carthaginian control over the island as an obstacle to its own expansionist goals. With diplomacy exhausted, both empires turned toward war, setting the stage for the First Punic War. Conclusion: the Punic Wars were more than just territorial struggles. They represented a complex clash between two empires with fundamentally different political systems, military organizations, and economic models. The rivalry between Rome and Carthage was driven by a competition for dominance, control of trade routes, strategic advantage in the Mediterranean. These wars were not merely conflicts over land, but ideological battles that reflected the contrasting visions of empire, governance, and power held by both Rome and Carthage. In the end, the Punic Wars marked the rise of Rome as the preeminent power in the Mediterranean and signaled the decline of Carthage. Rome's victory in the First Punic War set the stage for its future expansion, while Carthage's defeat marked the beginning of its eventual downfall. The consequences of the conflict reverberated throughout the ancient world, shaping the trajectory of empires and the course of Mediterranean history.